Hi Year 8s, welcome back. Hope you've had a lovely Easter holidays. Time to get back into some work now. We're going to start off today with reading a bit more from My Sister Lives on the Mantelpiece. But obviously remember, as well as all the YouTube lessons, there's plenty of other things to be getting on with. There's stuff on folder, there's read theory. Do any reading you can. It doesn't have to just be read theory. Read a book, read anything on the internet, do some research about someone you find interesting. Lots and lots to be getting on with. So back to the book then. If you remember, the last time we read it before Easter, Jamie and Jazz had just been and done that talent show. Mum had turned up, which they were pretty surprised about. The audition hadn't gone brilliantly. The judges liked Jazz but didn't really like Jamie. They said he was pretty rubbish. But it finished when Jamie had ran back up to Mum after she was leaving. She said she wasn't going back to the cottage with them. She wanted to go back to her sort of new life. And he said, but what about my t-shirt? He'd been wearing that the t-shirt, and she said, it's a lovely top. Where did you get it from? It really does suit you. So obviously it wasn't from her. It wasn't a birthday present from her after all, like it had been made out to be. So we'll carry on from there and see how we get on today. I didn't even speak when we got back to the cottage, and Dad asked if I wanted a hot chocolate. For some reason, I'd spent the whole journey thinking about earthquakes, and as soon as I walked into the hall, all I could see was the ground shaking and buildings falling in some faraway places like China. I wondered if they had earthquakes in Bangladesh, and if Sonia would tell me about them at school. She didn't come to the talent show, even though I invited her in that Christmas card covered with please in gold glitter. She must still be cross with me, so she won't want to talk to me about natural disasters anytime soon. Do you want a hot chocolate? Jazz said softly. I just nodded and went upstairs to find Roger. He wasn't in my room. I sat down on the windowsill and stared at my reflection in the glass. The Spider-Man t-shirt looked rubbish. Maybe Mum had been joking, or maybe she'd forgotten that she sent it. Yes, that had to be it. I nodded and my reflection nodded back. She'd forgotten. Mum always forgets stuff. She goes to supermarkets and can't remember what she wants to buy, and she can never find her keys because she forgets where she puts them. Once they turned up in the freezer underneath a bag of frozen peas, and she had no idea how they got there. No wonder she can't remember something that happened 132 days ago. Dad walked in with my hot chocolate. Steam swirled out of the blue cup. Here you go, he said, sitting on my bed. Since we moved into the cottage, Dad's only been in my bedroom once, and that was when he was drunk and looking for the toilet. I didn't know what to say, so I sipped my drink, even though it was too hot and burned my tongue. Nice? He asked, nodding at the cup. It wasn't, but I said, anyway. He hadn't stirred the chocolate powder in properly. It was all at the bottom like a cup of mud, but it was hot and it was sweet, and Dad had made it, so it was good. He looked all pleased with himself as he watched me drink. Good for the bones. Grow up to be strong like Rooney if you drink one of them every day, he said. I'll make them for you. He was going red and rubbing his hand over his chin. It made a nice noise because of the whiskers. I said, okay, and as he stood up, he squeezed my shoulder for the second time that day. I'm going to the building site on Monday morning, he said suddenly, staring at his foot as it moved back and forward over the glitter on the carpet. If they'll still have me, it'll do me good, something to get up for. He cleared his throat, even though there was nothing in it. Something to stay sober for. When I spray my deodorant, all the tiny drops hang in the air for ages and don't disappear. That's exactly what the word sober did. It just stayed there, and I couldn't look up because I didn't want to see it swirling around Dad. I stared at the powder in the bottom of my cup as if it was the most interesting thing I'd ever seen. It was dark brown, almost black, and drying in funny shapes. Jazz reads her horoscope, and some people read palms, and some people read tea leaves to tell their fortune. I squinted at the chocolate powder blobs, but they didn't reveal anything about my future. Finished? Dad said, and I said, yeah. He took my cup and walked out of my room. I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed with a tummy ache, and I rolled on my right side and then on my back and then on my left side and then on my front, but I couldn't get comfy. My bed was too hot, and I turned my pillow over to find some cool. I kept saying, She forgot that she sent it. She forgot that she sent it. But the doubt had come back and everything was black and I didn't believe the words in my head. Mum gave up her job months ago. Mum doesn't work for Mr. Walker or any other mean boss. Mum didn't have to teach when I invited her to parents' evening, and she wasn't even in the country when Jazz invited her for Christmas. She'd been in Egypt with Nigel while we'd been sitting in the cottage waiting. But she was at the theatre. She drove all the way from London to Manchester to see us in the show. That had to mean something. I felt all wobbly and dizzy. I didn't know what to believe. All the facts that were strong and safe and big and true had come crushing down, like buildings in an earthquake. They don't just happen in China or Bangladesh. There was one in my bedroom, and it was shaking things up and smashing stuff to the ground and changing my life forever. Granny says, be careful what you wish for, because it might come true, and I always thought it was stupid, until now. Ring this number to change your life. I wish I'd never picked up the phone. When I opened my eyes, sunlight was pouring through the window. I blinked 12 times to get used to the light. I yawned and it hurt my head and my eyes felt bruised. I hadn't slept very well. I got out of bed and I expected Roger to rub his fur against my shins and wrap his tail around my ankles, but he wasn't there. I hadn't seen him since I got back from the contest. I stared out of the window. The garden was almost too bright to look at, with the sun reflecting off the snow. I could just about see the tree and the pond and the bushes, but no Roger. I ran to the kitchen. I looked at Roger's bowl. His food was still there, not eaten. I raced into the lounge. I looked behind the sofa. I searched behind the chairs. I sprinted up the stairs. Strange chemical smells were drifting under Jazz's door. I turned the handle and walked in. Get out of my room, she yelled. I'm naked. Probably a lie, but I shut my eyes. Have you seen Roger? I asked. Not since yesterday morning, she replied. You shut him out of the lounge when we were practicing the routine. If guilt was an animal, then it would be an octopus, all slimy and wriggly with hundreds of arms that wrap around your insides and squeeze them tight. I went into Dad's room. He was asleep on his back with his mouth wide open, snoring loudly. I shook him. What? He groaned, covering his face with his arms and licking his dry lips. They were covered in brown stuff that looked like hot chocolate, and he didn't smell too strongly of alcohol. Have you seen Roger? I asked, and Dad said, I let him out yesterday before I drove to Manchester. And then he fell back to sleep. I put on my wellies, put on a coat, and set off. I searched the back garden. I shouted Roger's name. Nothing happened. I squeaked like a mouse and I squealed like a rabbit to try and make him stop sulking and start hunting. He didn't come out of his hiding place. I looked up the tree to make sure he wasn't stuck on a branch, and I searched for paw prints, but the snow was fresh and there weren't any marks. The pond had melted and my fish was swimming, and I said, hello again, before I left the garden. Roger isn't a moody cat, so I was surprised he was being so grumpy. I walked down the road and my head felt hot because of the sun, but my feet felt cold because of the snow. Every time I moved, I expected to see Roger's orange face. First it was a bird, then it was a sheep, then it was a grey dog running down the path with a red Christmas bow tied round its neck. I patted him and said, nice dog, to the owner. He's a bit too energetic for me, lad, said the old man, who was smoking a pipe and had a flat cap on his head. His hair was the exact same colour as the dog's fur, and he had a kind face and brown eyes with heavy lids that made him look sleepy. Have you seen a cat? I asked. A ginger one? The man frowned. Yeah, I replied, laughing because the dog jumped up and put its icy paws on my tummy. Down, Fred, the man muttered. Fred wagged his tail and ignored him. A ginger cat, the man said again, and I didn't understand why he'd gone pale or why his hands shook when he pointed down the road. Over there. Thanks, I said with relief. I pushed Fred down. He licked my hands and waggled his whole body. I'm sorry, the old man said, his voice all wobbly. I'm so sorry. And that's when I knew. That's when I knew that Roger wasn't hiding. That's when I knew he wasn't just in a mood. I shook my head. No, I said. No. The old man chewed the end of his pipe. I'm so sorry, lad. I think your cat. No, I roared, pushing the old man out of the way. No! I ran down the road, scared of what I might see, but desperate to find Roger to show the old man he was wrong, that Roger was okay, and that my cat was just... oh. In all the white snow, there was a bright orange blob, tiny, lying in the road 50 metres away. It's not him, I told myself, but my blood froze like the witch in Narnia had made it winter, not Christmas. The sun shone on my head, but I could not feel it. I didn't want to walk another step, but my feet weren't listening to my brain and they were moving fast, too fast, down the road. It could be a fox, 30 metres away. Please let it be a fox, 20 metres. It was a cat, 10 metres, and it was covered in blood. I stared at Roger. His glittery tail twinkled in the sunlight. I waited for him to move. I waited for 5 whole minutes for him. Something, anything, to move. But Roger was still. His legs looked too stiff and his ears looked too sharp and his eyes were glassy green marbles. I hate dead things. They scare me. Roger's mouse, Roger's rabbit, Roger. I took a deep breath. It didn't help. The octopus was holding my lungs and squeezing them hard. There wasn't enough air. There would never be enough air. I started to pant. I thought about the last time I saw Roger. He purred in my arms, but I dropped him on the hall carpet. I closed the door in his face when he just wanted a stroke. I ignored his meows at the door, and I didn't even say goodbye when I went to the audition. I didn't say goodbye, and now it was too late. The snow underneath Roger was red. A sudden gust of wind blew his fur and he looked cold, so I tiptoed forward. My teeth rattled in my head. My shoulders moved up and down as I tried to suck air into my chest. I was only 2 metres away now. I dropped to my knees and crawled closer. Slowly, slowly. My heart bashed against my ribs. Roger's side was cut open. It looked deep and gooey. His front legs were twisted at a funny angle, broken, snapped. I thought about Roger sneaking off into the bushes and Roger running through the garden and Roger jumping out of my arms and landing on strong legs that still worked. I couldn't stand the thought of him all cracked and cut and cold. I had to fix him. I pushed out my finger. I moved my arm forward. My fingertip brushed his fur, but my hand flew back as if it had just touched something hot. I was panting so hard I felt faint. I tried again, and again, and again, and again. I thought about the rabbit I lifted up with sticks and the mouse I carried on paper, and for some reason, Rose, blown into bits. My throat burned painfully. I tried to swallow, but the spit wouldn't go down. On the 6th try, I touched him. My arm was shaking and my palm was sweating, but I put my hand on Roger's back and held it there. He felt different. I remembered all the times I put my fingers on his fur, feeling warm skin and beating heart and ribs vibrating with a purr. They were still now. There was no life left in his whiskers, no life left in his eyes, no life left in his tail. I wondered where it had all gone. The burn in my throat spread to my cheeks. They went from freezing cold to boiling hot in less than a millisecond. I stroked Roger's head, told him I loved him, said I was sorry. He didn't meow. I saw some tyre marks in the snow, deep and short and diagonal, where someone had put on the brakes quickly and skidded on the road. All the hurt turned into anger. With a shout of rage, I jumped up and kicked the tyre marks. I stamped on them, spat on them, grabbed the snow in my hot fingers and threw it into the sky. I fell to my knees and punched the tyre marks as hard as I could, and my fist hit the road and the pain felt good. The skin on my knuckles split open. I hit the road again. If I hadn't gone to the talent contest, Roger would still be alive. Last night I'd have noticed that he wasn't in the cottage and I'd have gone to look for him, and he would have come running up and he would have rubbed his body on my wellies and his fur would have glinted in the moonlight. but I've been too busy worrying about Mum to worry about Roger. I stopped thumping the ground. I stood up and my knees shook. I walked over to Roger, and this time I didn't feel scared of his dead body. I wanted to hold him. I never wanted to let him go. I wanted to give him 1,000 strokes, 1,000,000 cuddles, say all the things I should have said when he could still hear my voice. I picked him up gently, as if he was in one of those boxes marked sacred. His head flopped on his neck, but I lifted it onto my shoulder. I pulled his body close to mine and stroked his fur. I rubbed his head and rocked him gently, like women do with babies. I missed my cat. I missed him so much that the burn in my throat and the burn in my cheeks spread up to my eyes and burned them too. They started to water. No, not water. Cry. I cried, for the first time in 5 years, and my silver tears fell onto Roger's orange fur. I hated how cold he was. Roger had been outside too long. I unzipped my jacket and pulled him against my Spider-Man top. Then I zipped it up again to shelter him from the breeze and the snow that had started to fall. His head poked out at the top of my jacket, and I kissed it gently. His whiskers tickled my lips. I carried him home. I walked around all the icy bits on the road so that I wouldn't slip. I couldn't see the cottage through my tears, but as I walked up the drive straight into the back garden, I was talking to Roger all the time now, telling him about the audition, how amazing jazz had been, how I'd understood the words of the song for the very first time, and how they might have changed me. I told him I'd wanted to make Mum proud, and that was why I'd shut him out of the lounge. I explained that I'd closed the door because I was practising and I wanted to impress Mum because I was stupid and I hadn't realised it was pointless until it was too late. I whispered, "Mum's a liar and she abandoned me and nothing I can do will ever make her love me." I wanted Roger to purr or meow so I knew that he forgave me, but he was silent. I didn't know what to do with my cat when I reached the pond. I didn't want to bury him. I thought about his body under the ground rotting away and I was almost sick. I cuddled him hard, desperate to keep him just as he was, tight against my chest, bleeding all over my t-shirt. But I knew I had to do something. Roger deserved a proper funeral. I thought about my sister on the mantelpiece. It would be nice to have my cat there too. I pictured an orange urn with Roger's ashes inside. Then I could still talk to him and stroke him and hug him whenever I wanted. And all of a sudden, I understood. All of a sudden, I got it. Why Rose was in an urn on the mantelpiece. Why Dad found it too hard to sprinkle her in the sea. Why he gave her cake on her birthdays. Why he fastened her seatbelt. And why he hung a stocking by the urn on Christmas Eve. It was too hard to let go. He loved her too much to say goodbye. I fell to my knees and put my face in Roger's fur and cried until I couldn't breathe. My nose was running, my head was thumping, and my face was swollen, but I couldn't stop. I heard a window open behind me. I heard Dad shout, "Jamie, get inside, it's freezing out there." I didn't move. If I couldn't have Roger, I wanted his ashes. I found 2 twigs and held one between my feet and used my right one to rub the other against it. I cuddled Roger with my left arm and sang into his ear so he wouldn't hear the sticks rub together and get scared. It didn't work though. It was too wet for the twigs to catch fire. I heard the back door open and I turned around. "Dad." "It's freezing," he said again, but then he stopped. "Roger." Dad pulled me to my feet and gave me the first hug that I can remember. It was strong and tight and safe, and I pushed my face into his chest. My shoulders shook and my breath came in gasps and my tears made his t-shirt wet. He didn't tell me to shh, and he didn't say calm down, and he didn't ask what's wrong. He knew it hurt too much to say out loud. When there were no tears left, Dad patted me on the back and unzipped my jacket. I didn't stop him. He took Roger off me, gently, slowly, softly, and lowered him to the ground. He touched Roger's eyelids and closed them carefully. The marbles disappeared. Roger looked like he was fast asleep. "Wait there," he said. His eyes were sad, but his mouth was determined. He disappeared inside the cottage. A minute later he was back, carrying a spade and a small object that he dropped into his pocket. I started to say, "Cremate him," but Dad said, "We can't build a fire in the snow." I tried to pick Roger up to take him away. I didn't want my cat to be buried underground. Dad grabbed my arm and said, "He's gone." He nodded his head, convincing himself of something. His eyes filled with tears, but he took a deep breath and blinked them away. He nodded again, as if he'd made a big decision, started to dig, said, "Whatever was there has disappeared." His voice was tight with a sadness I thought I understood. It took a long time. The ground was hard. All the time Dad worked, I stroked Roger's head, telling him and again that I loved him. More tears filled my eyes and trickled down my face. I didn't want the hole to get deep enough. I didn't want Dad to finish. I wasn't ready to say goodbye. Jazz appeared at some point. I didn't hear her. 1 minute she wasn't there, and the next minute she was crouched by my side, crying quietly, stroking Roger's bloody fur. Her hair was bright pink again. She'd dyed it back. Dad stopped too quickly. "It's done," he said. "You ready?" I shook my head. "We'll do it together," Dad whispered, and he took the small object from his pocket, the golden urn. "We'll do it together." Sometimes Mrs. Farmer said it's too cold for rain, and that's how Dad's face looked, too sad for tears. He walked over to the pond. Jazz stood up and crossed her arms, hugging her own body. I lifted Roger. Dad opened the urn. The sun shone stronger than it had done all day. Light bounced off the golden urn, making it sparkle. I walked to the hole. Dad emptied some of Rose into his hand. No, not Rose. Rose had gone. Dad emptied some of the ashes into his hand. I put Roger into the grave. Dad took a deep breath. I took a deeper one. Everything was still for a few seconds. A bird sang and a breeze shook the bare trees. Dad let go of the ashes. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't need to this time. Rose left a long time ago. The first ashes fluttered down to the pond, mixing with the snow that fell from the sky. They landed on top of the water and sank. I could see my fish swimming near the lily pad. I grabbed the spade and scooped some of the mud. My hands were sweaty on the metal handle. I held the spade over the hole, but I couldn't turn it. I couldn't drop the mud on top of my cat. "Roger's gone," I told myself. "He's gone. That's not him. Whatever was there has disappeared." It didn't help one bit. All I could see was Roger's black nose and Roger's silver whiskers and Roger's long tail, and I wanted to get him out of the grave. I wasn't ready for him to be dead yet. Dad tipped the urn again. More ashes fell onto his palm. He clenched his teeth and turned over his hand. Rose's ashes dropped into the pond. If Dad could do it, so could I. I tipped mud into the grave. I couldn't look at Roger. I couldn't watch his body disappear under the dirt. I whispered, "I love you, and you'll always be my best pet, and I will miss you." And then I pushed mud into the grave as quickly as possible. I didn't wait to see what Dad was doing. I knew that if I stopped even for 1 millisecond, then I wouldn't be able to carry on. I patted down the top of the grave to make it all neat and flat. Then I dropped the spade as if it had germs or something. I couldn't believe what I'd done. I felt sick at myself, sick at the world, sick in my tummy and my heart and my head. Jazz put her arm around my shoulder and held me as I cried. Roger was gone. I'd never see him again. This was too scary to think about, so I rubbed my tears out of my eyes and forced myself to stare at Dad. He was still by the pond, still sprinkling Rose's ashes into the water, bit by bit. I walked over to him, pulling Jazz by the hand. We stood either side of Dad and watched the ashes fall. My fish was swimming in a pretty pattern, his tail wiggling happily, and some of the ashes landed on his golden skin and stuck to the shiny scales. There was only one full of ashes left now. The last few specks fell onto Dad's palm. He lifted the urn and looked right into it, shocked there was nothing left. His hands shook. "Don't," I said suddenly. "Don't do it." Dad's fingers curled around the last few ashes. "What?" he said, breathing heavily, his face whiter than the snow all around us. "Don't do it," I repeated. "Keep those." Dad shook his head. "Rosa's gone," he said with difficulty. He held the ashes up. "These aren't her." I stopped crying. "I know," I said, "but they were part of her body. You should keep them, just a few." Dad looked at me and I looked back and something big zoomed between our eyes. He dropped the last few ashes inside the golden urn. We were freezing, so we went indoors. Dad disappeared upstairs for 2 minutes and Jazz made 3 cups of tea. We didn't speak as we drank them in the lounge. The mantelpiece looked empty without the urn. I realised Dad must have put it in his bedroom, out of sight, but there if he needs it, which he will on the really sad days like September the 9th. I know I'll never forget that Roger died on January the 6th for as long as I live, even if I have 1,000,000,000 pets, because none of them will be as good as my cat. When we finished our tea, we just sort of stared at each other. Something big had happened to us that morning. Everything was different, and even though my tummy ached and my heart ached and my throat ached and the tears kept falling, I knew that the change wasn't all bad, that something good had happened too. Jazz still didn't eat, Dad still drank, but we stayed together all day, in the lounge, not really speaking, but not wanting to go to our bedrooms either. We watched a film. Jazz asked me if I wanted to watch Spider-Man, but I said no, so she put on a comedy instead. We didn't laugh, but we smiled at the best bits, and Dad told Jazz, "I like your hair." And when she said, "Thanks," he replied, "You should keep it pink." And when it was time to go to bed, and the stars shone in the sky like hundreds of cat's eyes on the dark road, Dad gave me my second hug ever. It was as strong and as tight and as safe as the first, and I lay under my duvet missing Roger, wishing he was on my windowsill instead of lying underground. Dad came into my room with a hot chocolate. He put it in my hands and the steam felt nice on my face. This time the powder had been stirred right in. So a really sad part of the story, quite difficult to read, and I'm sure if some of you have got pets or have lost pets, you will have found that quite moving. Obviously there's a lot of death, that's what this story is about. It's about his sister who died, but actually Jamie seems to be more upset by the death of Roger than he does by the death of Rose, because Rose was older than him. He was only 5 when she died, so he hadn't really got that relationship with her, whereas he did have quite a strong relationship with his cat Roger. What I'd like you to have a go at doing is imagining that when Jamie is burying Roger, he's written a letter or a poem for Roger, telling him about how he feels about him. And I'd like you to have a go at either writing a letter or a poem that Jamie would have written to his cat Roger. Okay, spend about 10 or 15 minutes on that. We'll carry on with the story next week.